G'day guys, welcome to Super Little Challenges. I'm Daniel Thomas and my guest today is Mike Oppenheim. Mike is a humour and philosophy writer on Substack. He's also an accomplished author who has many unique perspectives given his diverse life experiences. Enjoy this one, guys. Let's go. Thanks so much for doing this. We actually have quite a bit in common in terms of bands, book publishing, living in foreign countries. So really excited to chat to you. Essentially, this show's about challenges and overcoming personal challenges. And there's so many challenges within all of those areas. So maybe let's kick it off with being in bands. You're in bands in your early 20s. That's correct?
Yeah, most of when I was 11, I first heard Nirvana and I was like, oh, I'm going to get a guitar and be like a famous rock star. So that was after years of listening to Pink Floyd and The Doors. So it was kind of like all like in the cards in my head. And so I loved music, absolutely loved it. And so I started playing guitar, I started playing drums. And then by the time I was in high school, I wanted to start bands. So I was trying in the local scene and with no success, the usual like, the band member's lazy, doesn't show up to practice, like that kind of stuff. And so then when I went to college, university, I took like a pause and, just played music by myself, but I wasn't in any bands. And then as soon as I graduated, I started my first like real professional band with friends from high school and another friend I'd met. And we moved to this town outside New York City, like about, I wouldn't say outside New York City, maybe like 3 hours away. And we started practicing a lot and playing gigs. And our last gig ever was down in New York. And then we broke up. And then I started one other band after that in Portland, Oregon. And so I never got to the Kurt Cobain Nirvana level for many reasons. But the many challenges along the way and the success I got, the lessons learned were amazing. And I just loved it. I loved playing music. What I didn't love was staying up late at night, waiting for gigs to start and playing for empty crowds. That was the part I did not love.
I think regardless of what level a band is at, whether it's small, middle, or like on a big scale, even if it's just like a garage band, it just, in terms of like personal growth, it's like one of the ultimate things, because not only do you have to work within a relationship and find your way within a collaboration with other creatives, but then, as you say, it's the waiting around at the gig, the stuff that goes wrong. So I reckon it doesn't matter what level your band is, like some of the challenges are pretty consistent.
Yeah, totally.
Well, is there one you can remember particularly with a show where something went wrong and you had to deal with it, or?
Yeah, there's a lot. I think, to be very honest, it was the inner dynamics of the band, like just like arguing about setup time, arguing about where things go, sound checks. Someone like one band member was notoriously slow at everything they did. Like they moved slow, they set up slow, they tested slow. Like, and by testing, I mean sound testing for people who aren't in the business. And then like I was the band leader, so to speak, like the singer and the guitar player, and I wrote most of the songs. But I had like a very bad attitude about like performing specifically. I like attention differently than you get it when you play music. And so I don't like live up to that or that. So I would say that like things going wrong, I would just say it was a comedy of errors every single time, because it was like the drummer was the most enthusiastic and ready to go. And he also drank the hardest. And like, it's just like, so, but to this day I sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you keep in touch with the
I keep in
guys.
touch with too. Yeah. And it's cool. Like we have really good memories, just like amazing memories. It's almost like we're in this like unique like fraternity college type thing, like it's just that
I would say that is the biggest challenge, is holding a band together in terms of the relationships. I mean, I had a similar thing. I was in London, went there with the band, and we just wanted more shows, and we were telling our manager at the time, just give us more shows. And he basically said to us, if you guys don't work out how to like function in your relationship, we're not going to have any shows because you're going to break up. And we were like, no, just give us more shows. And then what happened? We couldn't hold the relationship together and we broke up. So there were no shows.
That's pretty accurate to what happened to us. Our biggest show ever was when we broke up. We finally got like a Thursday night in New York City at a pretty important place, like it was that was like the turning point in our band's career. And we didn't blow it at the gig, but we blew up at each other on the way there. We took separate cars, I remember, because like one person didn't want to talk to another. Yeah.
It's so classic, the consistencies with this stuff, and the irony of it being your biggest show is, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
We took separate trains at a gig in London once because we weren't speaking. It's crazy. There's something about, I think it's just the kind of fiery personalities that come with musicians being in an enclosed space, practicing, trying to get trying to bring your thing to it, and like egos, trying to keep the egos away, at bay and stuff. So it's fascinating.
Yeah. And actually, now that I'm in a successful marriage after an unsuccessful marriage, I see a lot of parallels from talking to you specifically, like that. Like you can practice parts of the marriage as much as you want, but if you're not practicing everything, including inner dynamics, it's not going to work. Like,
yeah, and there's so many moving parts as well. It's like, particularly, and that is a nice analogy, like, any relationship,
yeah,
how you make that work. But in bands, there's like, if it starts to be, if that business element starts to come in, and all of a sudden the drummer's like getting 1 cent, and the royalties aspects start to come in. So from my limited knowledge, I think the bands that have lasted the test of time have really worked hard at getting that relationship intact. Yeah, and it's nice to draw a parallel to that with personal relationships.
Yeah. It's scary when you're not getting along and you don't know how to solve it. I mean, I think therapy is good for that, but like they have band therapists now. I'm sure you've seen that. That's like a thing. Yeah. That was not around when we were doing our thing.
It's a niche. It's an absolute niche. There was some kind of monster, Metallica. They had
exactly.
And they were paying him like thousands per week, and then they got cool with each other, and they had to like kick him out, and he was a bit upset. No, awesome. That's a good introduction in the 20s. And you've also lived in a few different countries. Is that?
I've lived in only like Thailand and America, but I've been to 30 something countries, and I traveled all over. Yeah. So I love, I realized only recently that I don't love travel as much as I just love like meeting people. That's like my favorite thing. So I like just going to places, and then I wouldn't even say meeting people, seeing people watching. It's more like the author side of me. I just, that exposure to, especially, I don't know if I have a feeling Australia is similar to America. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of grow up in a bubble. Like you're just like this big giant landmass with your own people, and you have a pretty much self-sustained economy and system. Of course we import and have, but it's not like Europe. It's not like Central or South America. You're not like tucked next to a bunch of cultures and countries. So like you traveling from Australia or America and seeing the way the rest of the world lives is really eye-opening, at least for me and most people I know. And then, I mean, you're living in Germany, so I'm going to assume there's like a lot of things you like about like the European culture and the way they do it. And I fell in love with Europe when I was there. And, I've been, most of my time recently was like when I worked in education, I would go to London a lot and England. But yeah, so the traveling thing was really fun. And then Thailand was because I met someone in America, my first wife, who was actually, it's a very strange story, but she's a US citizen. She was born here with two Thai parents, both getting master's degrees. And in the Thai culture, if you're in the upper class, that's what you do. You go to America to get your master's. Not some people go to England, but for some reason they choose America for their master's program. Even though they learn British English, which is kind of weird. So she was living in America getting her master's when I met her. And part of our like deal for getting married was that we were going to split time in the two countries, and then eventually actually just move all the way to Thailand. And I was on board. I had no issue with it in theory. The more I started to do it, the more I wasn't as on board because of a million reasons. But it was cool to live somewhere and get over culture shock. That was a really monumental, talking about overcoming challenges. I taught ESL for 10 years, so I had no doubts that culture shock is a real thing, but to experience it on the level you do when you finally move to a country I'm sure you went through this. It's crazy because you don't see it coming. At least I didn't.
Yeah, culture shock. I mean, it's still happening to me every day. I've been here 10 years, but it's like you said, you can sort of drop by a country or visit, but until you actually live there and try and transition a life into it, particularly a foreign country, I've talked about it a lot. But it was being in my early 30s when I first came to Germany and not being able to order like a loaf of bread. I was
Yeah.
like, am I too old to be like retraining my entire existence? Or, but I knew that my life was here, and I had to really get, but and I also appreciated the challenge, not to overuse the
Mhm.
term, but like you say, being, a fish out of water, essentially, and finding your way within that. Just like the band thing, I think it brings on so much personal growth, just trying to build a life in a foreign country. And so you had an issue with kidnapping. Was that in Thailand?
Well, the kidnapping is in Thailand, but it wasn't. I was not in Thailand. So my that woman and I, we were married for. We were together for 3 years. Then we were married for about four, and we had a son. About with 2 years to go in the marriage. Obviously, at the time, that's not how I would have told the story. I would have just said we had a son. And when he was two, we'd gotten divorced about 6 months earlier. I gave her as like a good faith gesture a trip to Thailand with him for 2 weeks because all of his relatives on her side are there. And again, our plan was to eventually move there, and he'd already been there before. And so she went, and she never came back. Her father emailed my parents a polite, dismissive letter that basically said, "We have decided not to return
Oh,
our
wow.
daughter." Yeah, they made it about her, so it wasn't about him. It was like she can't function in America without a husband and everything. Like this is not how we saw things going. And in their culture, it's a very like patriarchally dominated, like Eastern Asia, like almost Thailand's not technically East Asia, but it's more of that style of parent structure. So this event occurred in 2017. It's now 2023. So I tell the story like very, very differently than I would have in the first year or two
Mm.
when emotions were soaring and stuff. And so, that's basically like the theme of your podcast and the theme of my life. Actually, now that I look back in reverse, is just constant bombardment with like things that test my patience to walk the high road and try my best not to like cast stones of dispersion and attack and things like that. And so I learned a lot through the experience. I think the reason I don't tell the story with a smile on my face, and I probably never will, is I just miss my son. I mean, I loved him. I spent every
Mm.
day with him. So it's like there's no happy spin on that part of it. I do get to see him occasionally. It's very random. They'll just Skype call. So it's a very fragile, tenuous situation. And the only reason they still even somewhat keep in touch is because uh, they convinced me to drop like the State Department application to have a trial over it. And in doing that, I lost all my rights to do anything ever to like try to get him back. But I also didn't piss them off past like the edge of like whatever it is that we stayed on. So they haven't been true to their word that they would do weekly calls and let me visit, but they have kept me enough in his life that he all the time has known who I am, doesn't have any issue like knowing where I am. I don't know what they tell him. I don't know what weird version, but he's 7 going on 8. So I think the questions are going to start coming heavier and harder. And I have a very good feeling that he'll come back into my life like the way I
Mm.
would hope. Everyone I talk to says around 11 or 12, kids start to like really figure it out. And then they can lie all they want, they can do, but I have like an outstanding track record, and I've sent letters and mail. And I just, when he's much older, I have all the documentation from the trial that we were trying to set up. So if push comes to shove, I'll be able to tell him that. But as I get older, I just realize like this is like his thing and it's my thing and it's our thing. There's like 3 things going on at once, and I have to be very careful to let him do his thing.
Mm.
If his narrative for the first 18 years of his life is like, my dad didn't want me, whatever that is, like I have to just, as a dad and as a friend and anything, I just have to let him do that. That's like his young man's journey, so to speak.
Yeah, man, obstacles, like you say, and constantly dealing with those, and it really resonates me with with me what you're saying in terms of international relationships and the difficulties that can arise with those. I had some early toing and froing because I have a son here in Germany, and I understand. I understand how very quickly those logistical things can move around in the grey area of it all. But like you say, I think as he comes into his own, he will naturally have questions and they will be answered. So yeah, but I mean, good on you for like, for staying level through that and backing yourself and stuff. So it's not an easy situation.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I always think of when I'm get really low, like it used to be anger. That was the main problem I had. I was just I'd picture her father or her, either one. They were like the two villains. Her mother a little bit, but not as much for some reason that actually doesn't make sense. I should equally have the same feelings against all three because they all did it together. But anyway, for whatever reasons, like my anger would flicker differently. And then one day I really thought about it and I was like, you're pretty preachy about like anti-war. You're pretty like Pink Floyd, Roger Waters, like, we got to like not support bad states and things like that. I grew up watching my country invade Iraq twice. And like, it's just a lot of like, politically, I'm neither a Republican or a Democrat in my country. I'm politically like a peaceful person who wants politics to be peaceful. So that's the most succinct way I could explain my anger with all that stuff. So I thought about it and I was like, you got to lead by example. You got to follow that whole like thing. If you want the world to be the way you are, then be, the change you want to see. So I was like, I guess I kind of understand now how like Russia and Ukraine feel, how China and Taiwan feel, how like all these argumentative people who had relationships and now they've broken, like that probably England and America for the first 100 years, like after we split up, like that feeling is something I'm suffering and dealing with on a personal level. So I decided to try to do what I'm always telling countries to do, which is like, okay, take our son, like take him and do what you're going to do. And I will patiently wait and hope that someday your hearts meet my heart in the middle.
Patience is a big one.
Yeah.
I get it. I mean, early on here, I had some, because my relationship broke up early on, and I had some legal questions, and I was sitting in a German system, barely able to speak German, and trying to get answers on the legal stuff. And I remember being in a meeting, and I just said to the guy in the meeting, "Look, I had a translator, but I was like, I'm not understanding a lot of this." And then he got very defensive and was like, I'm going to take this legal document away from you if you continue to like push at me. And I was just like, wow, I think it would be hard enough if this situation was going on in your home country. But to deal with it in a foreign country, like you say, it is a sort of smaller micro version of a bigger world conflict.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally hear you on that. And it cannot have been, it's obviously ongoing, but it cannot have been an easy thing. And good on you for taking the high ground. So yeah.
Well, thank you. And yeah, it is getting easier. I'm not going to lie. It does.
Yeah. And but good on you for being honest about it as well. Because
cool.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah. So you have a podcast which deals with a tricky topic, which some people are uncomfortable talking about, and that's death. I think that's fascinating because death is a part of life, right? What have been some of the biggest takeaways in doing the show?
Oh man, it's funny. Okay, so I love talking and I like meeting you, and I was like so excited to meet you. I guess for your audience's sake, they should know this podcast started at 4 a.m. local, so I got up at like 2. Oh. Yeah, so I got up at 2:30 a.m. to meditate and like try to like a little bit freshen up, and I made some espresso. And the point I'm making.
Thank you for that. No, thank you for that. I didn't realize the time. That's very much appreciated.
Oh, no, yeah, it's fine. Yeah. And the reason I did is because I was excited to come on, and I'm excited to meet someone new. When I do my podcast, I'm always excited the day of to meet my guests and interview them. But the actual behind the scenes and logistics is like a lot of work. I'm very surprised. one guest a week, one show a week, production. My wife helps, my brother helps, and like booking alone is like can be, I shouldn't say is, it can be very annoying. And so my overall point is that I really want to quit it, and I've wanted to quit for like a long time, and I'm in year 3 and I'm not going to quit because the payoff is so high. Just listening to people talk, and you interview very similarly to how I do. I know I'm talk on this interview, but on the other side of the microphone, I'm actually like a lot like you. I ask a question and I sit and I let my guests answer it. And that's the best part of it, is letting someone answer in a long form. Like the podcast is only about half an hour long, but I really try hard to let my guests just speak without fear of me like attacking them or because it is a philosophy show, but I'm just like asking which thread is connected to which thread, and if they notice the tapestry the way I'm noticing it. And that's basically what the interview is. It's just exploring how their philosophy either changed or didn't change through life. Some people are near-death experience survivors. Some people are cancer survivors. Other people have no experience with death. Every guest has a unique, different story to tell. And actually, usually when I'm on a podcast, I ask the other host, you in your case, to come on it, because everyone is interesting if you get them talking about death. It is, like you said, it is a binding common experience, but it's the only binding common experience that no one's experienced. So it's like this ironic thing that like you can say you remember your birth, I won't believe you, but I'll smile and say I do. And like you can say you remember a lot of things, but not everyone actually goes to school. That's like some countries, some cultures, not everyone, blah, blah, blah. Most women have a period. So I would say that's like a binding experience that 50% of the world shares. But yeah, death, that's the big uniter in a weird way. And so in American culture, I don't know about Australia at all. It's so taboo to talk about death. It's crazy. Like our ads are just all about like drugs to prevent ailments, but they don't even mention death. Like, like when 9/11 happened, when like the trade centers fell, that's like one of the only times I've ever seen us kind of start to talk about death. But even in that case, they airbrushed people jumping out of the building. Like you can't find the original footage that shows constant suicide, which I don't even know if I would call it suicide at that point, whatever you want to call that. But my point is that's how standoffish and weird we are about death, is like we silently censor anything about it. No one talks about it on TV. The second time I've heard it mentioned a lot was when Jeffrey Epstein killed himself, and all those people kept going on TV and being like, Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. But that was actually just about like CIA and like, like government ops. It wasn't really about death. And I'm only mentioning this because that's how weird it is to do the show, is like a lot of people are surprised when I tell them, and many people refuse to come on. And so I love the show. It really has helped me see something about the most happy, chill people do think about death. I would just say that it's like a common thing. And I think a lot of really anxiety driven, not depressed, but anxiety driven people don't like to talk about death or think about it. And I think that's probably a huge source of anxiety.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's really I guess it really is the discomfort and the friction that it confronts in people for some reason. And like you say, the media and everything just shies away from it, but it's something to inspire us to live, right? Without to fully, like you say, it's the only guarantee, really. So why not just put that on the table and openly talk about it, so that we can live more, abundant lives, knowing that that's a sure thing and part of the life cycle. I'm not sure what my question is. There isn't really.
Oh,
it's
no.
just,
well, I would say the religion thing is pretty interesting. Like that's the other thing that comes up a lot. Is just like, I think I thought religion was designed to like tell people how to like live so that we socially get along better. Like famously in like the Jewish religion, don't eat pork. They say it just comes from like health reasons. Like don't eat shellfish. Well, it's because most people get sick when they eat oysters. Like, you got to be careful. So they say a lot of religion is instructive like that. But I think the other side of religion is to quell, address, or some other verb with this theme of death. Like I think that Catholicism is like if you're good, you're going to go to the best place ever. And if you're bad, oh my God, and so that like, I can't imagine growing up Catholic, like to have at an early age be told that if you're doing things wrong, there's an eternity of punishment is scary. And I'm going to be very honest, somewhat psychotic to me. Like that's a very like mean, but if you believe that, it's not mean, you're actually saving people. And that's the irony of like fundamentalism is you're saving other people from an eternity in hell. And then like you can go on the complete other side. There's like Buddhism, which is like, oh, this is probably your 1,000th life, maybe your 10,000th. It's like a scarf carving a mountain. Don't worry, you'll do this millions of times and you won't remember it. And so it's interesting to hear people say, I tell myself I believe this, but I don't. I do believe this. I used to believe this. The near-death experiences are the ones I kind of like lean forward the most on because they're like tasting like something I want to see.
Closest to the threshold of,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that Catholicism could be very perpetuation of fear, and then, like you say, you find it's the more anxious people that don't want to address it. But if anxiety is being generated in the first place, it's kind of like feeding itself in a way. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does, and it's interesting. Like, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying to put it on the table and have these discussions is very healthy.
Yeah. And it branches into other things too. Like aging is something that also affects all of us, but some people aren't aging at the same observable rate, but we're all aging at the same rate. And so I do think that a fear of death can age you in a certain way. It may not be perceptive from the outside. Like, if you drink way too hard, you're going to look 20 years older than your friends at your high school reunion, that kind of stuff. But there's a different way you age, and like the wisdom of knowing the hours in the sandglass are going away, but taking that with grace. There's something really cool about that. And so I'm in my early 40s and I love interviewing people who are 70, 80 and 90 because you really like 70-year-olds, like my parents are in their 70s. They're the most interesting because they're really starting to really deal with something that we're just talking about the way children talk about what they're going to be when they grow up, like you're in perfect health and
I often talk about the concept of time as you get older relative to what so like a year when you're 1 year old is just this endless amount of time, but when you're 70 it's 1/70th of your life, so it's potentially just a gone in a heartbeat a year. And how to chat to the older folk, it's like how they I think I got to do that more. Chat to the. I mean, obviously, I did with grandparents and so on, but it was like my grandma in the UK was in a home towards the end, and she'd my grandfather had sort of been incapacitated in the military, and she had to basically raise 3 children and run a business on her own. My grandfather died in his 40s, and then she was like running the show for 40 years. And she used to have a sherry, a little shot of sherry, I think, in the morning, afternoon, and night, right? Wow. And when I went and visited her, which I knew would probably be the last time, she in the home, she was just like, "Can you just get me a sherry?" And all the rules and regulations and everything were, "No, I can't do that. It's too risky." And I understood that, but I was like, Jesus, if this woman has done this for the past 50 years and got through all this stuff, just let her sit on the balcony and have a sherry,
Yeah, that hit me. That story hit me. I do think like the elder care issue is so weird. It's weird in every country, and it's just like Americans are really. God, I feel like this is like the anti-American podcast from that perspective. We're very, we do a lot well. Let me just make a blanket statement that I'm not like some self-loathing American. I think we all have like strengths and weaknesses, but.
So I think perhaps talking to someone out of America might,
Yeah. It just helps because I think a lot of Americans would agree with me though, that we really dropped the ball in this area, that we don't know what to do with older people. We also like tend to move away from our parents. That's like a very popular thing in this country. I did it. So I'm actually back here in Phoenix, Arizona because my parents live here, and it's not where I grew up. And my wife, I met her here. Her mother's also here. So like we kind of had that same like message, like, just sit and hang out and be with these people. And we're not like hoping that soon at all. It's the opposite. We'd love them to live like 20, 50 more years. So, but the point is we want to help take care of them, and we want to let them have their sherry, so to speak, as long as they can, that's very sad what you said. That is a very like, and the worst part is that you did the right thing, because getting her kicked out would have been detrimental to like everyone. So it's crazy to like agree with you, even though my heart was like, no, sneak the chariot,
Yeah, I think regret is something that I'm trying to hopefully keep at bay in the older years. It's like, at least know that I've had a swing at things, that they might not have worked out how I perceived or how I wanted, but just to know that I had a swing at stuff. I hope that I can, in old age, appreciate taking those swings regardless of how they came out, as opposed to sitting there being like, I wish I had tried to. Why didn't I? I think that's kind of what I'm striving for. I don't know about you. So
yeah, no, and I think a lot of too about, because you took the analogy of swinging, so I immediately went to baseball, and I was thinking about like, in baseball, there's a finite field with a really clear line of what a home run is, and what the rules are for a hit. So swing and a miss, swing and a hit, like all of that is clear. Something I'm learning from that podcast too is it's not so clear in life. Like if your band had become really successful and I knew the name of it and I'd paid money for tickets and waited in lines to see your band play like 7 times or something, that doesn't mean you'd be happier right now. As a matter of fact, a lot of research indicates you'd be less happy than you are in your state. So that's like a total mind F for me to like think about that. Like, did I really want to be famous in my early 20s? Like Kurt Cobain blew his brains out at 27. I was like dying to like catch up to him. Like what, so
it's interesting you say that. I realize in hindsight, if I had got what I wanted at that time, it would have been detrimental to me. I was not in a grounded enough position within myself to deal with that level of, so, but it's exactly like you say. It's like things don't necessarily work out how how you want them to, but it's, in hindsight, it's always like, well, it makes some kind of sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you said you have a son, and like I think those are the moments. I heard this, someone else, I think it was Ram Dass famously said this, but the nicest thing you can do for anyone is just to be present with them. Like, don't buy your kids presents, don't buy them the best school, don't send them away to like endless things. Like all of us just want FaceTime with the people we love. You just want like real, like Thanksgiving in America, it's not like show up and eat food, it's show up, like period. Just like I recently have changed a lot of my dietary habits, and I am a pain in the ass. Like I don't eat a lot of food anymore. I've become like stricter about vegetarianism and things like that. And so the only thing I did like as a saving grace is I just tell people like, make whatever food you want. I'll pick around it or I won't eat. Like, I don't care. Like, don't center things around me, because I just want to be at your event, So I hope as the world moves, we get more like that.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And presence, just being engaged, especially in this age with so much technology distraction, just being engaged with the person or what's going on in front of you. That's why I love this too, because even though we're through a screen here, it's like trying to cut to the core of things and be it's an exercise. I find these podcasts an exercise in listening, in terms of being engaged. And I think it's just awesome that we can just connect and have these type of conversations, having not met or known each other. It's pretty cool. So you've also done a lot of, you've published a few books. Have they all been self-published, or have you dealt with publishers as well?
Both. I've done. I went to an MFA program in how old was I? I was 27, and I was like, okay, I quit music officially at 26. And I was like, well, what's next? And I was like, writing. So I'm just like one of those what's next people. And as a child, writing was always my favorite thing. Songwriting was my favorite part of music by far. Like sitting in a room and tooling around and coming up with a song is way more fun than playing it and anything else for me. So I kind of like took that cue, and I did this. They have a contest. It's international, and it's called the 3-day novel contest. And all these people take a pledge of honor and say they wrote a novel in 3 days, and they submit it, and a winner gets published. So I submitted it. I didn't win. I don't even know how close or not close I came, but it didn't matter. The self-esteem I got from writing a novel was like incredible. Their rule was it had to be at least 40,000 words, and mine was 67,000. And so they did send me this like honorable mention. They said like, you had one of the longer stories, and I really wrote it in 3 days. Like I don't cheat, because what's the point? Like I don't like. And so I was like, okay, you have something going for you. Like it's not like you're, whatever. So I applied to this MFA program, Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, and I got into a school, and I went there and I took that novel and like lengthened it and made it like, my thesis to graduate. And then I sent that to a publishing house, and they said, we love it. We're going to acquire the rights. Here's a contract. I signed the contract. Within about 3 weeks, the 2009 financial crisis happened, in the too big to fail banking crisis in America, especially. And the publishing house went out of business. And so again, I was telling you, I have a theme of like overcoming weird challenges. So that was like a huge ego blow, and it took me years to catch back up to that. So I self-published a little bit after that. And then I got a contract 3 years ago for the novel that I'm currently like, advertising the most, which is called Ardor. And it, man, it was interesting. It was just like what we were talking about with like, when you make it, it's not everything you think. It was a frustrating, long process. It has nothing to do. I'm not saying anything negative about my publisher. It's more just that, like, I wrote the book in 2017. I edited it in 2018 and 2019. I got it accepted in 2020, and it came out in March of 2023. That's a long time to give birth to something. And I don't have the same enthusiasm for the book because I've written 2 novels since then. So to me, Ardor is not my newest novel. Ardor is like a project from around the time my son was taken. And like,
it's a slow cook.
Yeah.
What's your writing process? Do you have a kind of regimented way that you follow?
Yeah. Absolutely. It used to be write every day, because I have children and stuff. Again, it's not write every day now. It's just a quota of words per week, but I make sure that I have 2,000 words a week, like minimum, which is about a chapter in a normal novel is about 80,000 words. So 2,000 is like a certain percent. And like that tends to get me a novel written every 9 months. And then I spend about 6 months editing. So I'd say about a year and a half per novel. What I'm doing now that I've never done is the next novel I'm about to start. I outlined what I think is every chapter and the chain of events. I've never done that. And I wanted to see what that's like. That's like a very strict approach to writing that I thought I would hate. But after writing 7 novels, I'm like, I want to try a different way, So.
To put a framework to it's awesome. I self-published one novel, and it really, like you say, it wasn't about the it was the self-esteem, it was the confidence that came from getting that over the line, and I took far too long with it, but I got it there, and it was really about the process and just finishing it and getting it out. That was what was so beneficial about it. So in like these current times, do you see the kind of hybrid publishing way as a good model, where it's, the half, what is it, the kind of half self-published but half with a publisher? Or
yeah, I endorse all of them. If you have so I have a Substack and I do nonfiction, and that's actually been, previous to this publication, the most successful thing I've done. And so if you have a good list and you have good fans, I would recommend self-publishing. You get a much better royalty check. If it's for a living, that's what I would recommend. If you want exposure, the hybrid model isn't really going to get you that much more, I would say, than self-publishing. So really, you would just want a traditional publisher. But I would argue, if you want a traditional publisher, every single day it gets harder. Like you're the insane curve of like, there's less publishing houses. They're about to collapse into 4, I think. There's an antitrust lawsuit in several countries about this. Less publishing houses, less money, and less people are buying books. More competition from self-publishing and Amazon equals way less money and less selection room for people. So a lot of I get very annoyed by this. I'm a white guy. It's not like they're only letting minorities now and blah blah blah. I hear that a lot, and I hate that. Like, that's not true at all. They're just publishing who they publish. It's the numbers are pretty fair and even still. Or actually, if anything, they're becoming more fair. But the point is, I wouldn't. It's hard. I would tell a young person do whatever you want, but I would just say if you want a real like Penguin publishing house contract, good luck, because my contract is with a much smaller house and they're in the UK, and they're not going to fight Penguin, Random House, and the other three. But it was more for me an acknowledgement that after 15 years in the field, I do have a level of quality that was accepted. That was like a thing to hang my hat on. But I actually think I'm probably going to go back to self-publishing after this.
Interesting. It's really interesting to hear you being sort of further down the line through that. I've noticed some similarities with like music labels and filmmaking as well.
Oh yeah.
Where it's the independent thing versus the trying to find this way to do it, to be able to do it, to be able to sustain it, to have it reach an audience. Learning by doing. And for me, the writing is at the core, like the habits that you have in terms of putting a framework around the time and knowing that what you need to hit, and especially with the family and all life's commitments and stuff, and then knowing that that's going to take a block of time, as opposed to, oh, I'm going to write a book, and then it's like out in the ether of, well, how long's this? And even though you have this this structure, like you said, it's still a slow cook, and it still took 3 years after you had completed to get it out there. So there's a lot of awareness around the whole process, but just getting back to the writing, so that, like you say, you have a standard, you have a you've put in the reps,
Yeah, totally. And it's weird, and it's like we talked about, like my goals have changed. When I first started writing, I really was like, oh, I have something and I want to share it with people. And then it was never enough. Like I was like, oh, I'm not getting shared enough. Social media was like, of all the things that have come and not gone in my lifetime, social media is my least favorite. There's like nothing that, it's just not my personality. It's not my kind of thing. And yet I was told every day in that graduate program, be on social media, be active, get followers. Like you can't make it without it. And it's true, undeniably true. And for music, for film, for anything you're doing, if it's entertainment oriented. And so it's very scary to me, because now that I'm like, I'm not old, but I'm older in that way that you are, and we're talking, and it's just with reflection, I just don't care anymore. I'm just going to keep writing because I love writing. I'm going to keep publishing, and I'm just going to see what happens. But I am fine with earning income through like 7 streams. It's totally cool with me. I don't mind.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. It's very similar kind of stuff that we groove in a way. I struggle with I really struggle with the social media side of things, but I think I've got to a similar point where I'm like, just focus on the work. Like all that other stuff is noise, to connect with people. We had a little film screening for a project I worked here, and it was just amazing because I hadn't actually sat with an audience for a number of years. And my dreams around filmmaking have been to have the work received. And I'd been in, through COVID, quite a kind of bubble of online stuff. And then recently we just had a small event, and I was like, wow, it's just so cool to sit in a room of people. And it doesn't matter if there's 10 or 20, but just to engage with the work, as opposed to all these sound bites and this endless social media thing that has nothing tangible to it.
Yeah, it's funny. I never made this connection, but I performed musically. I quit pretty much the year cell phones started to get popular. Like everyone had mobile phones, which for people who are younger, it was just a phone. It wasn't like something you constantly pulled out and checked. It was just like, oh, I got to make a call. I don't have to go home to a landline, or I don't have to ask the bar to use their phone.
And it had the snake game on it.
Yeah. So I just can't imagine that. What could be more depressing than playing for an audience that like doesn't really care, or they're talking? there's only one thing more depressing, which is now I imagine you play for people who are just looking at a phone. That must be even harder. You just made me see that, because a movie theater is one of the few places where at least you're supposed to put your phone away. You know, like the light annoys people. I do see people sometimes with it, but that is so interesting that really is like one of the last places now where people are probably actively engaged. You were talking about learning how to listen. Like active listening, I think, is the thing the whole world needs to learn much better. I think that we're really far removed from like the purpose of conversation in general. You're not supposed to be thinking about your next funny comment or how you're going to disagree with a person and be controversial. And that's why television is so fake and formulaic. And it's why podcasting is getting so insanely popular. People crave vulnerability and honesty.
Yeah. It takes up so much unnecessary brain space and overload. Yeah. The more stuff where we can, I mean, I'm not, we're all using it. I'm active on it, but it's, the more we can leave the phones outside for a moment, the way we manage them, and especially trying to instill this with my child as well. And it's, this is a whole Wild West, uncharted, because the kids are also quite intuitive with it because they've grown up with it. Yeah. So they're on a different kind of level, but it's such uncharted waters, and it's really quite challenging.
Yeah,
it's challenging to instill this stuff in them, because it's changing all of our brains. So it's but yeah, nice to go full circle back to the music thing as well, performance. Yeah, to bring it home, I like to give guests the opportunity to offer listeners challenges. Small. This whole show has been about little things that have potential to make a big difference. So trying things around habit or anything really. It's not like jump out of a plane. It's like, well, do you have anything that comes to mind, not to put you on the spot, that listeners can try in any of the really diverse and interesting fields that you've experienced in your life?
Yeah, actually I do. And it's only because I did a nonfiction book once called You Science, and it was a spoof on self-help, but I also took it seriously. And so one of the things I did was I did weekly challenges. So I did like a challenge of sleeping every night without a fan on, sleeping without a blanket. I did a week without taking the trash or recycling out, just so you could see how much waste you have. And I stored it all in like a bathroom. And I filmed the book and made it's on YouTube. I'm not like trying to sell it at all. It's not commercial profitable or anything, but the idea behind it came from this. I love reading and I wanted to be an even better writer. So I decided to read every like famous novel ever. And I just made a list and I just set up a plan for how to do it. And so I would just recommend to anyone listening that it does not matter what your challenge is. Set up daily challenges, weekly challenges, set up challenges, because one, I think you'll be shocked by how often you do meet them. And two, if you don't meet them, I think you'll learn how to calibrate what a challenge is to yourself. Because like saying I'm going to become the most famous musician ever, go ahead. You're allowed to challenge yourself that. But like maybe you'll see that like I'm going to be a musician is enough of a challenge for you. Like there is something weird when you're in your 20s and people are like, that's amazing that you just decided to go out there and be in a band. And you're like, that's not amazing, because you're youthful and you just don't care. You're like, you're used to falling down and getting right back up. Now, if I fall, I might have to call a doctor and like get my back checked and take tramadol for a week. Like, it's like, so I think setting yourself up for failure, as weird as that sounds, is actually cool and fun and interesting. And I guess interesting is your own life will become more interesting, which is ultimately all you have. I mean, you share experiences with other people, you relate to other people, but most of the time you're just in this weird headspace of yourself. So yeah, I would just say little challenges are super fun, and surprise yourself.
I love that idea of spoof on the, because sometimes I feel like I take them too seriously, but actually, there have been challenges around like finding the kind of funny stuff. But I love the spoof take or flip it. It's classic. I heard Will Ferrell running off a list of New Year's resolutions that were in the same vein. So he was like, I'm just going to refer to money as cheese, and that's my challenge. Is every time I talk about money, I call it cheese, and $100 bills are blue cheese.
That's awesome.
And I was like, man, my challenges are far too serious. It's all like self help. But yeah, so
Yeah,
but yeah, the
that's
idea
great.
of just setting yourself some and like you said, finding your gauge within that, and anything that has potential for failure has potential for growth. So yeah, it's really cool. And maybe for relative to what you do, people can challenge themselves to talk about death a little bit more without it being a taboo topic.
Yeah, definitely. I did a hospice for a long time, and I saw a lot of people die. And I'll tell you, not a single one of them ever said like, I regret, like, I wish I'd worked harder. I wish I'd talked to less people. I wish I'd been more closed, like they all expressed some form of like, I just wish I'd relaxed and loved more openly and freely. So.
Awesome. It's a nice way to finish. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate you getting up early over there. Yeah, nice one. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great to be on the show.